Do you want a little behind the scenes tour of the world of publishing? Well, then you're in luck because today I'm sitting down with Tom Colgan, Vice President and Editorial Director of Berkley. Basically, if you love thrillers and mysteries, then most likely he's edited it. So let's dive into the world of editing, publishing, and what really makes a book unforgettable. Berkley Books has a rich history of identifying emerging trends in commercial and genre fiction. What qualities or themes do you look for when acquiring new talent or titles you believe will resonate with readers?
Well, of course, the first quality is good writing. I mean, I know it sounds like a cheap answer, but it's not a cheap answer because, when it comes to books, good writing wins everything. Every rule you have is tipped over by good writing. So you might say we would never do this, and then someone comes along and does it in a way that you're like, all right, well, we could do that. We'll do it that way. But, this is where you really rely on the editors. Everybody thinks about editors in terms of editing, right? At the other end of the process. But, we acquire these books. And it's really up to us as editors to really see these trends coming. And, what makes good editors someone who can be ahead of the trend, not just respond to the trend. Although, obviously, I won't lie, we do, when things start going one direction, we definitely start buying a lot of stuff, that goes that way. But, we rely on our editors, and we have some really outstanding ones who can see past what's happening now and say okay, I think this is the next big thing. And we're very cognizant of always looking for that. And then one of the things that we talked about, which is very much in the news now, was that, we have a big initiative for DEI. And, I think that really, really helped us. We had some training about unconscious bias, and you could really apply that. I mean, obviously we applied it in the way it was intended, but we also could apply it in other ways. And it really made you open up your mind and think I think a lot of what we were doing before was sitting there and saying okay, I'm open to anything. Someone's going to send me something and I'll be open to it. But what the unconscious bias training taught us was, are we just doing this because it's the way we've always done it? Maybe what we should be doing is going out and looking at that, not just waiting for it to come to us. And that's what we did, is we went out and we looked for stuff, and we found some really outstanding books, and we found outstanding authors, and we've hired some outstanding colleagues. And I think that's something that really has made a big difference in our purchasing over the last couple of years.
Oh, I love that.
I should say acquisitions, not purchasing. Sounds like we work for train company or something. I don't know why I said train company. That's the weirdest possible.
That works. Train company. I think off the beat analogies are great. I mean, those are the ones that stick with you in your mind forever.
Yes.
I'll remember that forever now as train companies. So it's perfect. You worked with both debut authors and established names. How does your editorial approach differ when working with a new writer compared to a seasoned author with an established readership?
So obviously, everything's individual, right? It's not just a matter of seasoned author, debut author. Each debut author is different from every other debut author. Each seasoned author is different from each seasoned author. But clearly, there is something inherently different between someone who's been around the block a lot and someone who, is just starting out. And, with debut authors, it's really fun, first of all. It's just... the single greatest thing that I do in my job is the first phone call with a new author. So you've bought the book, you talk to the agent. Well, usually you talk to the author before you buy the book. You call the author and you say, hey, I've read your book. I really like it. I had some editorial thoughts. What about this? What about that? What about the other thing? You sort of feel them out for how you'll get along and, whether they like your editorial plans. Then you buy the book. But once you buy the book, the very next thing I do is call the author and say, well, the agent calls to say oh, yeah, it's done. Congratulations. Because that's really sort of the agents, they should do that. You can't deny them that. But then you call, you say okay, I'm going to call in an hour. And you call, it's so exciting because they're so pumped and it's so much fun to talk to them. And I still remember some of the authors that now I've worked with for years. I still remember those first calls with them and how exciting it was. It was just so much fun. So a debut author, See, this is where I talk about going off on tangents and not like remembering the question. So a debut author does need a little more handholding usually. One of the first things we talk about, like they don't even know the process. We'll talk about in that first conversation after we buy the book. I'll say like, okay, next I'm going to send you an editorial letter, and then you're going to send me back a draft, and then maybe we'll have another editorial letter after that. Maybe we'll have 2 or 3. Who knows? We have to see. Until we get it. Where we want it. Then it's going to come back and it's going to go to the copy editor, and then you're going to read the copy edited manuscript, and then you're going to, and then that's going to come back, and then it's going to be set in pages, and you're going to be getting a first pass, and the proofreader will be reading it. So we go through the whole thing so they understand what's happening. We'll ultimately then introduce them to their publicist and their marketer, and explain to them like what's publicity and what's marketing, and how they're going to work with them while still working with me. So there's a lot of stuff to cover, but that's also a lot of stuff that the agent will sort of fill them in on. Debut authors are super psyched about stuff. I don't blame them. They should be, but sometimes they need a little tamping down. Like, okay, you got to be calm. That's not going to happen, or don't, like the main thing would be, we would always say to them, don't get ahead of yourself in the sense of like, they want to go to their local bookstore and say, hey, I've got a book and it's coming out in a year and a half. And the local bookstore's like, well, what am I going to do with that? By the time 18 months from now, I'll have forgotten about it. Mm-hmm. So we'll be like, okay, hold it, rein it in, wait. And then a couple months before, then the bookstore can be super excited because they'll have an arc and they'll have stuff to do. And, so that's a debut author. An experienced author, it depends. There are experienced authors who I've worked with for years. So, that's one way of working with them. Then there are experienced authors who come to us from, other publishers or whatever. When I started working with, I worked with Janet Ivanovich on 3 books. It was a great experience. But it was book 24. I came in on, book 24. And there's nothing to tell Janet. She knows her audience. Her audience knows her. She knows her characters. She knows her plots. She knows, she knows more about that series than any editor could. And you can't come in and be like, no, I did edit the book, but it wasn't like you come in and say like, oh, the character wouldn't act this way, because she knows better than you do how the character would act. So it was a really fun experience. I really, really enjoyed working with her. But she knows what she's doing way better than you do. So it's better to just make some suggestions and stay out of her way. That's why when I started working with Clancy, the same thing. He knows his audience and he knows his books and his characters way better than I ever would. So you don't come in and say like, no, Jack Ryan wouldn't say that. So it's a very different experience, but it's fun. It's really fun to deal with an author who really knows his characters and really because you can also, sometimes you can make suggestions. You can say, well, wouldn't it be interesting if maybe he did this? And sometimes they'll be like, most of the time they'll be like, well, I don't really see him doing that. But then sometimes they'll be like, oh, that'd be cool. What would happen if he did that? So it's, it's a fun job. So it's fun either way.
That's good. That's sort of like I always call those the writing rabbit holes, when somebody like mentions something like, hey, they bring up that question, and then your own brain goes, wait a minute, they're 100% right. And then you find like a new little rabbit hole in your own writing to kind of create a little world background. Is there a specific like advice you would tell a debut author, like, yes, do this and do not do this?
So I have very specific advice for debut authors. My advice for debut authors is write your book. The book you want to write. Do not try to say like, okay, so when I go to writers' conferences, I always say like the one question you cannot ask me is what's selling, because that is there's the only wrong question, because I can tell you what's selling right now, but if I come in and I say like, okay, romantasy is super hot, and it is, of course, romantasy is super hot. You're going to say, all right, and you're going to go home and you're going to write a romantasy, and you'll meet me back here in a year and say, here's my romantasy, and I will say, well, that's over now. And on top of that, even if I didn't say that, if you were not really into romantasy, the chances that you're going to write a good one are almost zero, right? You have to really feel it. So you should write the book you want, and you should write the best version of it you can. And then let's see whether the market is there for it. And the best time ever to be an author, because you could be published by a big house, by a small house. You could publish yourself. You could go to Kindle Unlimited. And there's all sorts of places you can put it up. I mean, there's just so much you can do that you couldn't do 40 years ago. 40 years ago, it was like you're going to be published by a big house or a small house. End of story. There was a gatekeeper. There's no gatekeepers now for everything. You can put whatever you want up online. And so I think it's a great time. So that's all the more reason to do your thing and not worry about what the market is. And if you get it to me, I might say to you, hey, and we do this all the time. We'll say to people, if you pumped up the romance a little bit, this would be a really amazing romantasy. We never really say to people, change it completely. Like, we don't say, you deliver a sword and sorcery epic. We wouldn't say to you, all right, go throw a character in there that'll be a romance. No. But if you already got the characters and you've already got the juice going between them, we might say, like, hey, if you just pump that up a little bit, that would really push this over and really make it big. So, but we don't tell people to start over and just try something that they're not indicating they want to do.
That makes sense. I feel like I'm taking a little advantage here. I'm a debut author myself, so I was like, I'm just going to tip my own little question in here real quick.
That's fine. I'm happy to answer that. That's what I'm here for, is to answer questions. So
perfect. No, but that totally makes complete sense. You have to have passion for whatever you're doing, yes. And if that passion isn't there, the reader's going to see that. Berkley has been home to best-selling authors like Emily Henry, Ali Hazelwood, and Grady Hendrix. Can you share a success story about discovering or developing an author who became a breakout success?
Sure. Well, my most successful author from scratch, so to speak, is Mark Graney. And he's a great guy, a really talented author. I bought his first book and publishes it as a mass market original, his first 2 books. And then after he did his first 2 books, I was also working with Clancy, Tom Clancy, and Tom Clancy had a co-writer, and that guy left, and we needed a new co-writer to work with Tom. And I thought Mark would be perfect for this. So I hooked him up, and it really just shot his career into the stratosphere, because, first of all, he's a great writer. That's what really shot his career in the stratosphere, but also getting hooked up with Clancy was so perfect for his audience. That it really, really made him take off. And I don't know how many books I've done with Mark since then, maybe 20, I think, maybe, because it's been 14 Gray Man. I don't remember how many Clancy's, 4 or 5, no, more than 4, maybe 5 Clancy's, Red Storm, Red Metal, probably like 20. And he never ceases to amaze. He just, he keeps going. He's a great writer. He's a great guy. And he really, his writing really blossomed with Clancy. It really turned into Clancy taught him to write a bigger story. And it's just been a blessing to be working with him all this time. He's a great writer, but he works really hard. We always say, one of the things that's interesting is we always say the most important book to an author is book number 2. I'm not saying anyone can write book number 1, but book 1, you've been working on for 10 years, and you've been refining it and doing everything, and now the agent worked with you, and the editor worked with you, and you did it, and now you've done it, and then the editor says to you, like, okay, I need book number 2 in 10 months. And you go, what? Yep. 10 years for book number 1? You're like, yeah, well, it doesn't work that way. So, and in fact, Mark's favorite story, he says this story all the time. He did not perceive this Gray Man as a series. He saw it as just a one-time book. And so he said, I honestly don't remember this, but he remembers this conversation. He said that early in our conversations, I said to him, oh, okay, great. Now you're going to have to write a second Gray Man novel. He said, I am. And I said, yeah, you're writing a series. He goes, well, what would the second one be about? And I said, I have no idea. That's your job to figure it out.
Well, it's a good thing you said that, though. Look at the success from it.
Yeah, I know.
With Berkley's focus on genre fiction, such as women's fiction, romance, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, and suspense, what trends do you see emerging in these categories over the next few years?
Well, there are a couple. I mean, there are a couple of things that we're really into now. One of them, no surprise, because I mentioned it, I think, a couple of times already, is romantasy. Romantasy is huge. There doesn't seem to be any slowing it down. It doesn't seem to be, sometimes these things peak, everything does peak, so there'll be a peak at some point, but it doesn't seem like we're close to that yet. And that's going really well. And that's really interesting because it's also a lot of times calls for these really beautiful sprayed-edged books, which are really exciting to see and produce, and, a lot of fun to be a part of, because it's nice. I like ebooks. I like audiobooks. I like, but I still prefer like a printed book. So it's nice that so many people are really into collecting these beautiful books, and that's pretty cool. Another thing that we have started to really pick up on are lit RPG books. Do you know what those are?
No, I feel bad. I don't.
Okay. Well, I didn't know like a year and a half or 2 years ago, whatever it is. Lit RPG are books that are they mimic the story of a video game, not a specific game. They're not like they're not based on Diablo or something. It's like a separate. It's like they're telling the story as if it was a video game. This character, in a video game. And we have a series of books called Dungeon Crawler Carl by a guy named Matt Dinneman. They're so entertaining, and they're about this guy who the world they're almost like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The world has been destroyed, and he survived. The Earth has been destroyed. He survived along with his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, and they are being run through a video game by these forces beyond our control we're looking for a character for the video game, and they use him. It's wildly entertaining. And I think so we bought them after he self-published them. I think he's up to book 7 or 8 now. We just publishing book 2, but they're really entertaining, and we have some other ones coming up that we're excited about. It's a really interesting thing to get into. Ali started off as a Raylo writer, and then started changing her writing. But we find a lot of authors that way. It's very interesting. There's just so much stuff out there. It's so interesting, and like I said before, it's a time when it's most interesting to be a writer because there's just so many different things you can do, and there's no one to tell you no. There's no one to say like, "What? You can't write a book that follows a character through an imaginary video game." Sure you can, and it's great when you do it right. So it's a lot of fun. So and then we're buying a lot of mysteries now. We're finding that mysteries are very hot, and horror is also very hot.
Okay.
Is doing very well. So, but we're trying to do things that are a little bit different. We're trying to do like horror that, has some other elements that maybe some, we haven't found a horror romance yet, but we're thinking about that.
The publishing landscape is constantly evolving, especially with the rise of digital platforms and self-publishing. How does Berkley adapt to these changes while maintaining its commitment to its authors and their books?
That really isn't. These are all excellent questions. I have to tell you, they're really good. You're right. It is very different. It's a different market than it was not just 40 years ago, though it was just a couple years ago. And we have made adaptations. I mean, it used to be very much that, we'd say to people like, you're selling us full volume rights, and full volume rights means, we're going to do the hardcover and the trade paperback mass market and the ebook and the audiobook. And, now we might not have all that's full volume rights. It doesn't mean that you have rights throughout the world. You could have full volume rights for just North America. So you wouldn't have, in that case, they would sell British rights separate and they would sell translation rights separate. So we might not have always had world rights, but we would always insist on full volume rights. And that's changed now that we recognize that sometimes the audio is not available for some of these books that have been self-published. They've already published the audio, and in some cases we will say okay, this is so interesting, we will buy this backlist book from you without audio. Now we won't buy frontlist. We won't. If it's a book going forward, we're going to insist on the audio book, the audio rights being included. But the other thing is also scheduling. Like a lot of these authors do a ton of books. That's in especially in the self-publishing world, a lot of the success comes from having a lot of volume. So we work with them because they are publishing their other series in February and October every year, right? Mm-hmm. So now we've bought their backlist books. You can't publish it in February. You're going to, either we're going to squash their new book or their new book is going to squash our book. So we work around it. We say okay, so we'll publish our book in May and December or something, so we will work with them to not step on each other's toes.
You've been at the helm of building global franchises and developing long-term careers for authors. What do you think is the key to cultivating an author's brand and sustaining success over time?
A lot of hard work. I mean, no kidding. It's not a joke. It's a lot of hard work. It is a dream, I think, for most would-be authors, or not just would-be authors, for any author, to say I have 20 books under my belt. But that also means you've got 20 scenes of car chases and 20 scenes, or maybe more, depending on the kind of book you write, or 20 love scenes, or 20 well, actually probably more like 40 or 50, you know what I'm saying? And then now you're on book 21. First of all, it's hard to, you invariably be okay, well, my plot's going to be this. Oh, wait, I did something like that in book 14, or, I've got a brand new plot, super excited about it. It's really new. And then, I've had authors tell me, they'll be I'm in the middle of writing a scene and I'm oh, wait a minute. This sounds a lot like something I did, 5 books ago. And, they say it's really hard. It's very hard, especially if you have a series. It's even harder if you have a series, if you have a character, because you're oh, this is the same thing that he's done before or she's done before. So that is a lot of hard work and takes really a lot out of you. And the other thing, I think the thing that sort of counteracts that is if you're willing to take chances, with your characters and with your stories. And the guy I always use as an example of this is C.J. Box, Chuck Box. He writes an amazing series, and he does all sorts of from the very first book, he does things that you wouldn't expect. It's hard to talk about because I don't want to spoil it if people haven't read the series, but when you read his books, you might think, okay, so this guy can't be the murderer because he's Joe's brother. I'm making that. Actually, I can say that because that's not true. Joe Pickett doesn't have a brother. I think it is have a brother. But you'd be so Joe's brother is in this book. He can't be the murderer. And then at the end, you'd be oh my God, he was. That's shocking that he would do that. And and because he does that, he does raise the stakes. You'll be reading later books, and you'll think okay, Joe's wife is in danger. Could she actually be killed in this book? I mean, nobody, most other series you'd read and you'd think, no, it'll work out in the end, but it really makes you think oh my gosh, it could really happen. So if you do something like that, if you're willing to do that, then I think that really helps keep stuff lively. And then the other thing a lot of people do is that, again, series authors, is they'll start a second series just because it sort of is like a palate cleanser, so they get like so mired in like, what we talked about, like just doing the same thing over and over again with this one character. And then if they come up with a different character who's completely different, they can freeze them up, and then it almost refreshes them so that they can come back to the first character again next year and be like, have a little, looks like a breath of fresh air. But it is, one of the things I always say to people is writing is a terrible way to make a living. It's very hard work. People always think about, super successful writers who like have mountaintop retreats. Of course, most people don't. Most people like go to work as a dentist during the day and then come back and work at night or do some work, before they go to work in the morning. And it's really hard work. And when you think about the amount of money, even if you make you get a good advance, let's say you get a 6-figure advance, which is great, right? You get a 6-figure advance. We just spent a whole year writing that book. And I mean a whole year. And if you broke it down by the hours that you spent, it's probably not even minimum wage.
It's true.
And if you like, I said, the thing is like, and it's lonely because you do it by yourself. If you would dig in a ditch, you'd be getting paid more per hour, and the probably someone next to you that you could complain to about the ditch digging. Like there'd be a guy next to you digging, and you'd be like, "Oh, it's hot, isn't it? Yeah, oh, it's super hot today." Mm-hmm. But when you're working for less than minimum wage and writing this book at home, you're all by yourself. There's nothing, And if you then say like, okay, well, I deserve to go onto like, TikTok just to like, as a break, then you find yourself there like 4 hours later and you're like, oh, now I've wasted a day. So yeah, it's a tough business. Now this is not the happy tone we're supposed to strike for the Kauai Writers Conference.
But I love it because it's so true. Like I was having a day literally just 2 days ago, and a friend of mine, we were talking, and she's like, "That's so amazing that you're getting to live out your dream and everything." She's like, "How glamorous," and she used that word. And I was thinking, like 2 days previous, I had my hair in this giant messy bun. I hadn't showered in like 2 days. I had pimple patches all over my face, and I'm sitting there in the dark corner, like typing away. And I was like, I don't see the glamour as much, but it'll come. It's coming with when you get to see it in your hand. I'm sure I'll feel it.
Get it in your hand. It's all worthwhile.
What advice would you give aspiring writers who dream of being published by Berkley or breaking into commercial fiction space? What common mistakes should they avoid?
Write your book. Don't ask me what's selling, but write what your passion is, and and then see where the market is, because that's the best writing you're going to be able to do is something that you're passionate about. Think about the kind of books you like to read, and then read a lot of them. So if you like Mark Greaney, which is a spy thriller, read a lot of spy thrillers and really get into it. Again, I'm not telling you to follow the market, but we've already determined like the part of the market that you like. So then you need to understand that part of the market. Doesn't mean you can't break we always say like, you can, once you understand the rules, you can break the rules. But like, if you don't understand the rules, then you're just stumbling across breaking them, and that doesn't come out right. Ultimately you need to find an agent. The mechanics of it are that you need an agent. As part of our DEI program, we had open submission. We had 2 rounds of open submissions where we let people submit without an agent. And we bought to date, I think, 5 books out of that. But each of those people, after we told them we want to publish your book, went off and got an agent.
Wow.
Well, it's easier to get an agent once you have when you go to an agent and say like, hey, Berkley wants to buy my book. It's pretty easy to get an agent because, it's a bird in the hand. But in any case, you should try to get an agent first. And I know that that's very hard. It's easy for me to say, but it's very hard to do. But one of the benefits of coming to a Kauai Writers Conference is you meet a lot of agents. The trick that we always tell people is going back to the idea of like the part of the market that you like, whether it's mysteries or science fiction or romantasy or thrillers or fantasy or just plain romance. Read the authors you like, And then a lot of times in the acknowledgments, they'll say, I want to thank my editor, Tom Colgan, and my agent, Joe Smith and whatever. And if you see enough books that you've written, like Joe Smith is the agent for a bunch of them, there's your man. That's the person you want to track down and say, hey, I really love this author and that author and this author, and I see they're all represented by you, and I've written a book that's very much like that. It's hard to get an agent, but agents are looking for people. I mean, they, just like anybody else, have to find new blood, So it sometimes, I think, for authors feels like they're not, but they really are. Every one of them is. So so there's that. But, ultimately what it comes down to is knowing what you want to write and writing it. And then, you're going to let the chips fall where they may. And as we talked about earlier, there may be some little back and forth about adding a little romance or adding a little adventure, whatever. But you're only going to get there if you've written something true to yourself in the first place.
I love that. I'm definitely the person that's going to say add a little romance. That's my side of writing. So always keep them coming. Speaking of the Kauai Writers Conference, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you got involved and what you're going to be doing there this year?
So I got involved through Lynn Lau Butler, who is a force of nature. I think most people know her. I think I can tell this. I'm sure I can tell the story because Lynn is an open book. Lynn was not Lynn was first published by Berkley, but not by me. I had nothing to do with her. In the sense that she wasn't my author or anything. She was my friend Cindy's author. And I guess I met her at Thriller Fest or something, and she was very chatty and talkative and blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then she started following me, online, because I write a daily journal online. And she started commenting on my journal. And then at one point, my wife and I went on vacation, went to Kauai, and Lynn Lau Butler writes back on Instagram, I'm in Kauai, can we meet for a drink? And, blah, blah, blah. And we go to meet her, and Claudia's like, who is this woman? She's one of your authors? And I said, no, she's not one of my authors. She's Cindy's author. And she was just lovely and bubbly and exciting, and it was so much fun to talk to her. And then I've actually been to Kauai twice, and then last summer, my whole family, 18 of us, went to Kauai. And again, Lynn was there. We met Lynn again. And then Lynn said, would you like to come back to the Kauai Writers Group Conference? And I said, oh my God, are you kidding? A free trip to Kauai? I don't know, how you can convince me to do that. So
twist my arm, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they said, so I spoke to David, and he said, well, would you do this masterclass, I think they call it? Is that what they call it?
Yes.
So he said, would you do this masterclass? And I said, sure, well, we'll be on it. He goes, well, whatever you want it to be on. So I was like, oh, what could I do it on? So I thought, well, what would be interesting? I think going way back to the beginning of our conversation today, all these ideas that people have about publishing that aren't true. And then I thought, wouldn't it help authors to understand how it actually all works? Because I've had authors who've said to me, you think this is a daily event to you, and the rest of us, it's just completely opaque. We don't understand what happens. The pages go in and a book comes out, and we don't know what goes on in between. So I said, fine. So there's 4 days of the masterclass. So I thought, okay, first day we're going to talk about the writer. Second day we're going to talk about the agent. Third day, we're going to talk about the editor. And the fourth day, we're going to talk about the publishing process, all the other stuff that goes on in the publishing house, all the way up to reversion, which would be hopefully 10 or 20 years after your book has been published and you want to get the rights back. So I thought that would help people to understand how you get an agent, what the deal with an agent is like, and what an agent will do for you, and what you can expect from an agent, what you can expect from an editor, and what you can't expect from an editor, and what you're going to have to do on your own, and all this stuff. So it's actually it's a lot of work for me because it's stuff that I don't really deal with the agent author stuff. So I'm talking to my friends who are agents about when they first approach you, what do you do exactly? So I'm getting all this information down, and I'm going to be ready to go in November to talk about this. And hopefully we'll have some fun in the classroom, and we'll talk about how a book happens, and hopefully people find it helpful.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I think that's the class that every aspiring author, or if you have written a book already, needs to go take, because you're right. We're not told, like, you have this manuscript and then there's a book. So like, what is all that in between? I know for me personally, going through the experience of publishing, I was like, I'm on Google, like, is this normal? Am I supposed to do this? What's next?
Yes.
Like thinking all those things out, like when you're first in it. Thank you so much for speaking with me, and I can't wait to see you at the Kauai Writers Conference in November.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Haley Grace. I'm really looking forward to it myself.